She's about to start it right now.
I just started it, and I put the YouTube live link in the chat if people want to share it that way as well.
All right, perfect. All right, so you ready to start?
Yes.
All right, everybody. It is on environmental racism. We've been planning this for some time now, and we apologize for the last episode being rescheduled. Kavehi was in the middle of a hurricane. We were having some technical difficulties, but I think it worked out. I'm very excited to talk about this, and it's super important, especially going into election season. So we have Professor Clint Springer, Grandma Casey, and Sierra Luna. We're going to go ahead and have you guys introduce yourselves and just tell everyone what your role in the environmental justice movement has been. And yeah. Whoever wants to go first.
I'll take it. Elders first, right?
Yeah.
I can see your pictures, so I know that I fit that bill. That tia Ijijuzi Dike Panka Abdi Manshte Panka Oklahoma. Ruahe Tamashik de Tinike Kegi that te. Hello, my name is Judy Casey Camp-Horinek. Is my colonized name. I'm a Ponca, P-O-N-C-A, Ponca Wa'u, Ponca woman from Oklahoma. I said, I've been looking forward to this moment, and I'm very grateful to be among you. Thank you. I serve as the environmental ambassador for the Ponca Nation of Oklahoma. I'm a former council member, an elder, a traditional drum keeper for the Women's Society, and most importantly, a companion of 51 years, a mama, a grandma, a great-grandmother, a daughter, a granddaughter, an auntie, a sister, a survivor of the onslaught of the colonial powers that came onto the shores of our people 500 years ago. And we live now in an area of where Phillips 66, formerly ConocoPhillips, exists with so much environmental devastation that we could only call it environmental genocide. As far as the portion of activism that I've participated in, I really do believe that I was born as what is now called an environmentalist, and certainly into a lifetime of activism just by virtue of being a survivor in our present day world and having to raise my voice and put my body out there on behalf of the generations to come. It has been a legacy that I follow through my mama, grandma, and beyond that, my brothers, my sister, my sons and daughters and family. And I'm really grateful that the two of you have taken it upon yourself to bring the voice of the indigenous people as well as those scientists and teachers to talk about what's going on now, because we're on the precipice of a cliff that we can only jump off of, and we can't climb back up if we don't do something to honor the Father Sky and the Mother Earth, and to bring things back into the sacred cycle of life in a good way. Thank you, Sha.
Thank you, Grandma Casey. We're happy to have you. Professor, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Clint Springer. I'm an associate professor of biology and the director of the environmental studies program at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And my area of scholarly study has been how climate change, specifically elevated atmospheric carbon dioxide, affects ecosystems and plants for most of my career. And so I've been looking at this from a scientific perspective for a long time. And to begin with, it was started that way. For me as a pursuit was an interesting scientific question. We didn't know as much as we know today. And now we've learned that human activity, mostly industrial activity, as well as deforestation and land use change, has led to climate change. And so it's affecting everyone. And it's affecting some of our members of our human family more than others. And so that's a major issue of justice. And I can't turn my cheek away from an injustice. So this is where my work lies, mostly in education, but also in scholarly work related to it.
Awesome, thank you. Tara, ready?
Okay. Yeah. Hi, I'm Tiara. I am the director of Allentown Earth Guardians, and my journey in the environmental work basically kind of evolved a lot as I was little. As a little girl, I already knew animals are dying, and there's no reason why animals are becoming extinct, and that like triggers something in my head right away. And I'm like, what? I need to be part of this. I need to do something about it because we need to protect our land. It's too beautiful, to just let it become destroyed. So as my journey in this has evolved, I was trying to find out exactly what I wanted to do, because the kind of monster that we're facing, there's just so much work that needs to be done everywhere. So right now, my main focus is with Earth Guardians Allentown, is to basically teach the inner city youth to the things that we were stripped away from, how to, grow our own food, how to take care of our land, how to basically fight back, taking what's ours originally, and basically, how to take care of each other and love each other and just reboot ourselves, taking back what's ours. So I'm just trying to basically help the youth find that voice that was taken away from us for such a long time. And yeah, that's basically what I'm really focused on right now, is just helping the youth, because the youth is our future. That's who's going to take care of us after.
Thank you guys. And tonight's focus will be on environmental racism. Is very connected to the Black Lives Matter movement. You cannot have racial equality without also protecting the environment. So the next question, you guys already touched on it a little bit. I want to ask Professor Springer just to update us and bring us to the current state that we're in, and explain a little bit about how we've gotten to this point of a climatic crisis.
Sure. So right now, the world scientific community has never been more sure that humans are causing a major climatic shift on our planet. And it's happening at a rate that we've never really observed before since observations have been started. There have been lots of changes of climate in the past history of the Earth and its 4 billion year history. However, most of those are much longer term, and other times we're at a much more volatile place where life was not nearly this developed yet. And so human activities that are causing this are the burning of fossil fuels for energy and other things. So oil, petroleum oil, natural gas, and coal primarily. And then also the clearing of land, of forests, like in the tropical rainforest regions of the world, where the forests are being cleared away and turned into things for agricultural use, which means they're releasing a large amount of stored solar energy in the carbon that's in their tissues by being burned. And so that gas goes into the atmosphere and intensifies the greenhouse effect that keeps Earth as a very inhabitable place and is intensifying it and making it worse. And so we get things, what we call global warming, which is the rising of sea, air, and land surface temperature. And then coming with that are the ice begins to melt on Earth, which is what we're seeing now. And that leads to sea rise. When ice that is over land melts, the water runs into the oceans. And so sea level rise will go up. And so that's another problem. So we have temperature, we have sea level rise. Because of the changes in temperature and because of the sea level rises and some of the ice melting in certain places, it's shifting the way that oceans circulate, which have large impacts on both precipitation and storm patterns around the planet. And also the warmer air carries more water. And so we get more drying and drought that occurs in some portions of the world, but that's not universally true. Some places will actually get more rainfall, which can be just as problematic as less. And so here in the United States, where I am in the sort of border of the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, we've already experienced about a 1 degree warming since the Industrial Revolution began in the mid-1800s. And then we can also, we will also see rising temperatures, as most places will, all places will, some more than others. But we will see a change, not necessarily in the amount of rainfall that we receive here, but we will get we will have a change in seasonality. So instead of getting it in the fall and the spring, we'll be getting it in the winter when the plants aren't growing. And so it will lead to more drought-like conditions here in our region. And so wherever you live, the precipitation patterns really matter. And if you live on the coast, which a lot of people on this planet do, then sea level rises are major concerns to people. And then also we're losing species at a rate of about 1,000 times the natural rate of extinction, which is something that Tierra commented on. And so that's true. So right in every hour that we spend together here today, 3 species will go extinct from the planet. And we will burn about 300 of our campuses at St. Joseph's University, which is about 325 acres, will be slashed and burned in that hour. So about 10,000 hectares. It's shocking the amount of devastation that human activity can have on the planet, but it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to have that. And so there are things that we can do, and we can do them quickly, as Grandma Casey mentioned, that we're quickly approaching a precipice that really we can't climb back up. We're going to have to go all the way across the other side if that happens. And it will look very different on the other side than it does today.
Thank you for that. Very thorough. Grandma Casey, it's super important for us to get an Indigenous perspective on that information. And I'd like you to say a little bit about how colonization and its exploitative practices have had a hand in climate change.
I think one can begin, as we spoke of just briefly one time when we were on a call together, about the doctrine of discovery that happened, I believe, during the 12th century. And I don't have my time correct on that, I'm sure. I tell my children all the time I have time dyslexia. Just don't quite have a frame of reference that works for me on that. And I have to kind of give that to my culture as well, because we didn't have the Gregorian calendar precisely, or this thing called, clocks that make us all have to be at a certain place according to how we are associated within a linear world that has been created around us. During the time that this papal bull edict was being created by the Catholic Church in Europe, it was all about land acquisition. It was about owning things, which was not something that our people have ever been familiar with. Those of us who still have our roots in the earth, who have the freedom to breathe the air and understand that everything has a natural law and a natural way of being, and that all life is sacred, whatever form that might be. Not to say we weren't territorial, because we definitely were territorial, because we felt as if, in our case, the Panka, that Wakanda, the great spirit, the great mystery, had a purpose. And the purpose was for us to live within the natural laws, to live within the understanding that the sacredness of the system set in place was so that all things could live. The plants could live because they had a purpose, a medicine. And they did the sharing of the breath with us. And of course, science, when I got into school, repeated that by telling us that they make oxygen and, you know, breathe in the carbon dioxide. Our people always knew that. Our people always knew that there was a certain manner that one treated water that was sacred, because water, water is life, but also water contains all life. And, oh well, I'm going to go on from there. So with the doctrine of discovery coming into being, it was to give Europeans the so-called right through their laws to come into a territory and claim it. And if the savages, the uncivilized indigenous people there had not adapted to Christianity, which of course we hadn't heard of, then they had the right to take the land and do with it as they would, and to tell the indigenous people there, you're less than nothing, will either kill you, enslave you, or just run you away from the so-called resources. I have a hard time with that word. I think we've got to leave the re off of there, the sources of life. Those sources of life were often the trees themselves that were felled for the building of the European cities, as well as the cities here in the United States. The rocks, the water, the other plant, and the animals that this young Tiara spoke of were also expendable. If one then progresses quickly hundreds of years into the age where the extractive industry began to discover the oil and gas, kind of like they discovered the indigenous people, and they discovered their America and created their American dream, as they discovered the way to print money and on and on. They often built their plants like they did here, the refineries and such things, where the poor people are. Primarily that was us, the indigenous people, the people of color, and poor white folks were the ones that had the coal mines that were in the hills that they also had to work, the mega farms, the plantations back in those times, even the oil and gas itself, which is part of our mother, the earth, an intricate part of her body, was extracted and used in a very difficult manner. So colonization has played a part by giving us a 1% that feel as if they have the right to control what money is created, how it's used, and who gets to live in a place that has the opportunity for an education, the opportunity to have an island that they can run off to. And it also creates a false sense of reality for them. because they live in air conditioning. They live in places that don't have a touch of reality, and they want to keep it that way. Colonization has everything, 100% to do with why human beings are so wildly out of touch with the world around them. You know, we have been trying to help people understand. We call ourselves water protectors, land defenders. You know, your Uncle Mika C. Slam had set that slogan on his very body there in Standing Rock, to help people to understand that we will stand for all that is right for the future generations to be able to breathe, eat, and drink in a good manner. But also to understand that we're not just protecting nature, that human beings like us are nature protecting itself. Because shall all of these things continue in the manner that they are, we'll simply cease to exist, like those animals that this knowledgeable professor was speaking about. We're nothing more or nothing less than the forelegs that feed us, the wings that fly, the fins that swim, and on and on and on. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, Wajingita actually told me something that stuck with me pretty heavy. And Wajingita is my brother and Grandma Casey's grandson. He said the same water that flows to my veins is the same water that has flown through the rivers and all of the animals. And that is another reason of why we're connected. And that just has stuck with me very strongly. So I appreciate everything you said. Kavei's going to ask the next question.
So the next question I have for you guys is, what do you understand as or of environmental racism, and how does it connect to systemic oppression of people of color and those in poverty? I know Grandma Casey had briefly mentioned how different like plants and just like extraction areas were established in poor neighborhoods of Indigenous people, people of color, and poor white folks.
I can start to respond to this, but I don't want to respond too much, because so one of the interesting things that I think that people don't really see is they don't necessarily see environmental racism, because it's somewhat overt, especially where a lot of us live. So in urban environments. So if I drive across the Benjamin Franklin Bridge and you look at the infrastructure for water treatment and things like that, it's very near public housing in Camden, New Jersey. And so that's a really good example of it. But what it really is this systemic oppressive racism at work. And it's really an example of it that it's just another way, another arm of the same monster, basically. And it really comes down to a lack of political power for people of color, which stems from the poverty that they have, that they're dealing with, that's being maintained by the system. And then also because of a lot of times a lack of even education, they don't even know what's happening next door. You know, it's just something else that somebody's doing. And it can look a lot like the same way. And so, and then on top of that, you know, we have actually worked to try to bring laws into action that can help in these situations, like the National Environmental Protection Act, which was just undone by the current administration. That exact thing was forcing anyone who was developing property to go through an environmental impact process. And that was the idea behind that, was that it would protect communities from having to deal with something that they didn't want to deal with, the not in my backyard sort of thing, Well, what happens is that, you know, that a law is no good unless people know about it and have access to the resources to make use of it. And that is where the systemic oppression comes in, because they know it's very easy as a developer to go into these communities where property values are low because poverty is high and unemployment is high and all of the things that we see in our urban environments. And then you add on top of that the fact that the people around there do not have the resources to research the kinds of things and do the kind of work you need to do to contest something under that law. That law doesn't, it works for billionaires, it doesn't work for people. That's basically what it does. And so, which is a lot of what this country is, right? It works for billionaires, but not people.
I can't breathe. I can't breathe. George said that. And it carries over into so many areas. When we talk Black Lives Matter, it's because of situations not just like the knee on the neck, because we're all aware that that has been part of this systemic problem that he's speaking of right now. But also we can't breathe because our people of color have these factories. We have these in the San Joaquin Valley where we marched with Cesar Chavez back in the 70s. The migrant workers can't breathe there because of the planes going overhead with the pesticides and all of that. So these massive farms and billionaires can exist. Down in Houston, where they can't breathe, the Hispanic area is where all of the pollution, all of the extractive industry tank batteries, and all of those terrible things are going on, the fracking that's happening in the Permian Basin. We can't breathe here in Ponca City because south of Ponca City is where the refinery is spewing all of the ugliness into the air. And so our Black relatives, our red relatives, our brown relatives, and the poor white folks can't breathe because of systemic problems that create asthmas, that create diabetes, that create cardiovascular situations where the rich folks can get in their planes. Of course, we don't, that's a whole nother thing, a whole nother area. And they can be in a place where the air is not quite as dense and poisonous as where their money is coming from. But this kind of racism, this kind of situation that we have all been raised in has an impact on the physical body that puts us all in a situation where we have to understand Black Lives Matter in order to be able to move forward. You know, because of that particular movement, you know, we've had movement in the indigenous world because people are looking around and saying, yeah, if it's true there, it's true here. If it's true there, it's true over here. That racism plays an intricate part in who gets to have what. You know, when I see the looting on TV, I see people who have been so oppressed for so long that they don't even know how to do anything but get what their family needs. I saw a man running out of a store the other day, and he had toilet paper, he had cleaning goods, and he had those wipes that disinfect things. When we see this kind of situation where COVID has come along, then we see that the people who can't breathe for one reason or another are the ones who are affected the most. Our death rates are the highest because our bodies are so impacted by the environmental genocidal practices of the extractive industry and of the mega farms and companies that are happening, whether it's plastics, whether it's papers, whether it's the coal or whatever. It is people of color that they're feeding into the fire of their companies in order for them to be able to make some money on it. So I don't even remember the question now. I got carried away.
You killed it.
All right, yeah, I'm definitely gonna snowball with that because I've been definitely been, targeted. I feel like I've been targeted. My people have been completely targeted because it started off with colonization. They took our land and then they took our education, they took our history, they took our waters, our air from us, and they put us in places where it's, where they're, mining, polluting everything, and they don't let us, they don't tell us what's going on. So I've had asthma since I was 7. I grew up in New York, and I've never, not once, thought maybe my asthma is, aligns with, climate change and the pollution in the air. Never once, but that's because they never taught us that until I actually moved to like an area in Pennsylvania, which is very well off, and they were actually teaching there about recycling, about all these hazard waste that's actually affecting us, how it's going to actually affect you, not somebody else. So I feel so stripped, and so I'm just so, it hurts you, you know what I mean? So that's why my work is so targeted into the inner city youth, because we don't know what it is having, going to your backyard and picking a tomato that you grew, and then the tomato that they feed us in the supermarket is, GMO, is things that they don't take care of. They're sprayed with pesticides and stuff like that. You go to a low-income neighborhood, you don't have organic. You're not going to find any of that. And if you do, it's very high priced. You're not going to be able to afford it. So it's like, what do we do, when this stuff was originally ours, and that's when we get oppressed. You're taking our stuff and then you're blinding us from the truth. So what do you do then, And then this is why, we need to wake up our people, hey, that's why I say reroot ourselves, because we're from here. Our ancestors knew what they were doing. They took that away from us, and we don't know what's going on. So we need to, educate our history, learn our history, learn exactly what's happening. Why are we in this neighborhood? African-American kids are 5 times more likely to be, have lead poisoning. And why is that? Because we don't have the actual funding of people to come into the buildings and make sure that we don't have lead, we don't have asbestos, we don't have people coming to the streets and cleaning the garbage, or we're not taught, hey, stop littering. We're not taught these kind of things, and they teach that in other places, and that comes with the funding. So something needs to change with that, because it really isn't right. And our kids are paying for that. Why do I have asthma at 7 years old? That could have been avoided. You know what I mean? And that's happening everywhere. So I'm just gonna leave it at that, because I get overwhelmed. Sometimes it's angering. You know what I mean? Like, when you feel like it hurts. It really does. So I'm just hoping that, this thing starts changing and more people start waking up and being educated, because that's basically what it is. We don't know.
For sure. And I wanted Kavehi to pull up some graphics that we got. And I'm going to talk about them a little bit. All right. So this is a graph that's showing the increase of 1 degree Celsius since basically the start of the Industrial Revolution. And as you can see, when the Industrial Revolution started, that's when we really started pumping carbon into the atmosphere. And then all of a sudden, we see this large trajectory upwards of the average temperature of our world. And whereas 1 degree Celsius doesn't seem like a lot, already from that, we're seeing, 4 to 10 inches of sea level rise. Permafrost is melting, which is a positive feedback loop, which is releasing more carbon into the atmosphere. We've already seen a lot of ecosystem collapse, and it's getting almost too much. Kavehi, go to the next picture real quick. So this is a photo that is shown what America is potentially going to look like in 2100 if we don't do anything. This is a 14 to 40 inch increase in sea level. And as you can see on the West Coast and the East Coast, all of it's almost underwater. Well, it is going to be underwater unless we make a radical change from what we're doing right now. And if you dig into that a little bit deeper, a lot of these coastways holds are major cities, and in those cities are where your people of color live, and a majority of those people depend on the state for protections. They depend on them for whatever the state can provide them through blah blah. So they're not going to have the resources to move like white people will, who have money, and like Grandma Casey said, have planes to move locations. They're going to be stuck, and really they're not going to have money to go inwards and build homes and build new communities. So this is the big effect of climate change, and really what environmental racism is going to end up in. A lot of people being homeless, and to dig even deeper into that, a lot of people not being able to afford food, medication, as our world isn't able to provide crops. And Professor Springer, in our class, I was in one of his environmental classes, he talked about food productivity. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So we have 10 billion people coming in the next 80 or so years. We'll be on the planet. So another nearly 2 billion, more than 2 billion people from what we have now. And right now we don't produce enough food globally to feed everyone. And I mean, we certainly have, there are certainly places where there's a lot more and places where there's a lot less, but if we distributed that equally among 10 million people, we wouldn't produce enough. And so we're going to put a tremendous amount of pressure on the earth to deliver in terms of agriculture, which means we need to find ways to grow more food in other places where food doesn't traditionally grow, or we need to find different foods. That's another solution that we have. But in all of those cases, we're not going in the right direction. But that's a population-based number, the 10 billion people, and that's what we don't have enough food. That doesn't really factor in how much climate devastation will take place in that same period of time and really impair the Earth's ability to deliver the food that is necessary for humanity. And so it's going to lead to places where you're going to end up with things like even beyond food insecurity, which is something that Tiara was talking about earlier. But the idea that food scarcity really is what it'll be, right? There'll be wars waged over it. We already see this. We already see this happening. We see food riots around the planet already in certain places. A lot of times it's in the places where food supply is marginal because it's hard to grow food locally in those regions, especially sub-Saharan Africa. That's a place where it's going to be particularly hit hard. And so if you factor in climate change plus population growth, we have a lot of pressure on agriculture to deliver, food to everyone. And so, so we need to find ways to make our food systems more efficient, and while also not impairing the ability of the earth to grow the food, right? So that's the thing, is the cycle here. And so there's a lot of solutions to that that we can learn from looking at nature itself and how it works. And so that's one of the things that I find fascinating, is that by studying how nature works in a scientific way, then we might be able to apply some of those same principles that people like Grandma Casey's ancestors have known for generations and generations and generations, and have passed down through family history and tradition and knowledge that way. And so it's, one of the things that I think that one of the best message that Indigenous people have, in my opinion, to all of us that are white or Western, is that we need to pay attention to the earth, and it will teach us what we need to know to survive. And so I think that's a really great, it's something that I've personally adopted as part of what I do with my research now. That's a different perspective than I ever had on it before. But if I can unlock some of these things in a scientific way that helps us use them, then maybe we can make a difference in places where it's really going to be bad. In the United States, we won't be so bad on food supply because we have a lot of economic wealth and we have a lot of land that can grow food. But in places where it's already, and that's what makes all of climate change a social justice issue, and really is that the decisions that we make to extract our fossil fuels and burn them and cause climate change impacts people living half the planet away from me. And so every time I turn on a vehicle and burn gasoline, I've affected that person's life and they've had no say in that decision. And so that is a justice issue, right? That's an injustice. So
I think one of the things that you touched on is the potential for famines and droughts in other countries. And one thing that comes to mind with that, which is a huge problem, is the amount of climate refugees that are going to be knocking at our doors in countries like ours. And even though America will be able to weather the storm a little bit longer than a lot of countries, and we'll have like food supply, like you said, those critical commodities, food, medicine, energy, are going to be unaffordable to the lower classes. And then you also have climate refugees knocking on our doors looking for a place to live and a place to eat. And America isn't even going to be able to feed and protect their own citizens. So it's a huge problem. The next question that we're going to go into is going to be about protests. And Grandma Casey, I'd like you to talk a little bit about North Dakota Access Pipeline. For those who don't know, the North Dakota Access Pipeline was planned originally to go close to Bismarck, North Dakota. Correct me if anything is wrong that I'm about to say, Grandma Casey. And it was redirected because they found out that putting it near that city full of non-people of color would be a big potential threat to their water supply. So they redirected it and tried to put it through a native reservation, the Standing Rock Sioux, North Dakota. And that in 2016, there was huge protests. And Grandma Casey, do you have anything to add about what happened there?
Yes, thank you, grandson. There are so many components to what we're speaking of here because, I first want to remind everybody that even though that small town was able to avoid having Dakota Access Pipeline go through it, and it did go through the Standing Rock, Lakota, Dakota, Nakota territory, it also affected 80 million people downstream. 80 million people downstream. And that's the farmers, that's the ranchers, that's the cities, that's the indigenous population. And it is too those animals that the young woman was speaking of. But I need to back up just one moment, if you don't mind. When we were talking about food and I was listening, everything he said is true, of course. It's a vital, deep understanding that we have to have about, people are talking about food and access to food and medicine and access to medicine as if they're separate. They are not. One of the young women brought up the fact that our food is substandard, we people of color, because we can't afford the organic food. And that's only been within the last few generations when these mega farms, mega ranches, the Walmarts, the Tyson chickens and all of those began to monopolize the food supply, that we quit having our little community gardens wherever we were. Certainly the inner city is not privy to that. And there's a reason for that as well that she pointed out. But we do see inner cities regenerating their community gardens and empty spaces. And when we begin to look at places like that, then we also have to take a look at Monsanto, who is trying to commercialize the seeds themselves and to say only a few of us are going to have access to those seeds, and they're bioengineered. So they're taking the medicine out of the food and they're creating these mega places to grow the food, which is only allowing the rest of us to not have that intimate relationship with what we eat. The power and joy of putting a seed into our mother, the earth, and allowing her to nurture and grow that seed, just like our mothers nurtured and grew us in the belly, and the beauty of the water and the things that were taken in. There's connection to all things in the most intimate and sacred manner that we have to always acknowledge. That's what took us to Standing Rock Slam. Whenever we were at our sacred ceremonies, it's white word is Sundance. I was going to say it in Ponca, but that's not necessary. But it's because we recognize the power of the sun as an entity, not as solar power, not as an abstract thing that happens at 5:49 or 7:18, depending on the time of the year, but as a source of life that comes in a sacred circle around the Mother Earth and connects us all through life in that particular manner. And you know, scientists, as I'm sure that the professor will stand to say, is that the sun is the creator of weather as well, not just of the sun rising and a certain amount of heat happening, but actually generates thunderstorms, you know, and on and on. So we were at the sacred ceremony in 2016, and during those ceremonies, the men and women, children, elders who partake in this portion of the ceremony will go without food and water for 4 days, and they'll dance in connection to the sun with their bare feet on Mother Earth and pray. And when you feel that thirst, you know how to pray for water, and you pray for water for all, and all is the very large capitalized all that is. And when you feel those pangs of hunger from fasting, you know how to pray for the food as an entity, as a sacred being that is part of your life, just like the water is, and you are part of its life. As you, I could go very deep there. I'm going to try to not do that. But as we were leaving that after an 8-day ceremony, and we were driving home, you know where Valentine, Nebraska is, Slam? Just south of our Sundance grounds. Minkasi, your uncle, called, and now we have these sacred connections called cell phones, right? And he said, Mama, he said, you know, after praying all this time, I just got this call from Joy Braun. She's Cheyenne River, Lakota. And she is at a place up there called Sacred Stone Camp with, I believe, maybe 17 to 30 others. And she's put out a call for warriors. And I believe that's calling me. And I'm going to have to turn around and go north. And it's difficult, you know, to be a mama to warriors such as yourself and others, and to see them feel that calling and know that they're going to go like our old folks did, going to put a stake in the ground and tie themselves to it and say, I will be here to defend until. And when he turned north, he called his brothers. It was 8/8/16, I remember that. And they also turned around, followed him within a day's time. And they began a form of nonviolent direct action, is what it's called now. Also protest, right? But there were sheriffs and such out there, and there was the Dakota Access Pipeline people. And they were coming across without that NEPA agreement, without going through the processes with the TIPO, with the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, without the free, prior, and informed consent. That is something that the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People has guaranteed us since 2007, and the United States has signed on to that as well. And so this small group of people had this small amount of maziska, money that was on those PayPal, something like that. Yeah. And so your Uncle Jeff was there by that time, and Mikasi, as well as other people. And they set up a group of people they called arrestables. And those were people with clean records that could be bailed out. They had X amount of money, X amount of arrestables. And then they'd go to the sheriff and say, this is the name of the people who are going to be arrested. And by the next day after that first nonviolent direct action happened, money began to come in on that internet thing that they use. I'm saying PayPal. I have no idea if that's correct or not. What else would it be? Anyway, more money came in. So more people were arrested. And then more money came in and more people were arrested. Pretty soon, the universe was calling so many more of us and saying, you're going to go up there, you're going to defend the water and protect the land, because that's what our Mother Earth is calling us for. Mind you, the earth will endure all of these changes that are coming. She is in a process of purification because we have dirtied her so badly. And she wants to make a place, a home for all living things. So she's purifying. And there are many ways that this is taken form. Hurricanes, larger tornadoes, those rains the professor was speaking about are violent sometimes now and flood everything. You know, the coming up of the oceans you were speaking of right there. She's trying to protect us as much as we're trying to protect her. So we were called to be there as some of her warriors. And I just simply followed my son's guidance, my daughters, my grandchildren, my ancestors, my mother, the earth, my father, the sky. And through prayer, many of us were pulled to be there and to be together and to stand together, just like we're pulled out into the streets when we hear Black Lives Matter. We're going to be there. We're going to stand arm to arm, and we're going to say, no justice, no peace. And the same thing happened there. It was the calling of the Lakota, Nakota, Dakota gathering that said that they wanted this to be in a peaceful way, that there could be nothing but spirituality that led it. The sacred pipe herself gave us direction. And I listened to others. I wasn't there full time. But I will tell you about one day I was there on October 27th of 2016. And mind you, this federal government people in the state of North Dakota had already brought in the dogs, just like they did in Selma during that time that the folks were trying to cross the bridge. And they had attacked our children. They had attacked our elders. They had attacked our people who were peacefully going to protect a grave site, to keep those vandals, those oil people, from ripping open the grave sites of our ancestors. And when they brought those dogs in, and they were not prosecuted, the natives were. It was a remarkable remembrance of what happened in the South to our relatives there. On October 27th, I was up there as a tribal official, as a tribal historic preservation officer, and as a council member for the Ponca Nation, because the Ponca once lived along Nishu, or the Missouri River. And we had an attachment to that. Your uncles, many of the other relatives, Wajingoda, they were all there at that time, about 7 miles north of where we were having the gathering of the TIPO officers. And at the lunchtime, we were given a prayer. And someone came in and said, the Wanashi, the militarized police from 7 different states were advancing on the treaty camp, the North Camp. And it was a peaceful camp of teepees and family members that were not armed, only with their prayer and their pipe. And there were sweat lodge ceremonies going on. And so the TIPO officers went to stand as observers. And that we'd had UN observers there. And the police actually told us where to park our cars, where to stand. And then over a series of hours, as they came into the treaty camp, which was standing strong to exert eminent domain over an unceded treaty area, because the DAPL was trying to exert eminent domain. We thought, your Uncle Mikasi actually said, well, why can't we do that too then? And as that was going on, they surrounded us with all-terrain vehicles, armed personnel vehicles, helicopters and planes were going overhead. And they began to advance on this unarmed camp. And they looked very much like zombies. They were in complete riot gear. And they had tasers. They had that pepper spray in canisters that was as big as the kind of fire extinguishers you see hanging in the hallways, And they had percussion grenades, they had sound cannons, and they were armed, all of them with conventional weapons as well. And they began to move on us like this very slow zombie shuffle. It was one of the more bizarre moments that I can ever remember existing in. And by us, I mean us elders at that time were being advanced on. Over on the right side of me, in a big circle of maybe 50 or more people, your Uncle Mikasi was sitting with all of the people in prayer, and they were sitting on the ground. They had their arms locked together. On the left side, Uncle Jeff was over there taking care of logistics around the cars that they told us to park over here, because we could see they were coming. We knew they were going to impound our cars as well. Various things were going on all around us, but more it was song and prayer that was going on. I was standing in a road with my sacred pipe. They eventually, I'm going to cut us into 4 hours later, by pepper spray and tear gas, percussion grenades, sound cannons, water cannons, and everything that you can imagine that they were inflicting on us. They arrested, I believe, 142 of us that day, hospitalized so many more. And they wrote numbers on our arms. I was number 138, I remember that. and they zip tied us, those handcuff things, and they set us in various places. I remember seeing 6 of them dragging your Uncle Mikasi away face down with his hands pulled up behind him. And he was screaming at that time, "Untie my elders, get those zip ties off my elders," you know. And next time I saw him was hours and hours and hours later. I didn't know what they'd done with him. They hauled us down to the basement of the jail, the courthouse there, where they had erected large dog cages to put us in. And they did strip searches on everyone, and they put us on the cement floors there. It was really cold, I remember that, but I also remember how grateful I was when they pulled us in there, and they had big school buses they hauled us off in. When they backed us in that, and I could see your Uncle Mikasi, they had him in a cage by himself, barefoot and pacing, but alive. He's never regained feelings in one of his hands because they had 3 or 4 pair of those zip ties on his wrists and just damaged his nerves so badly. I was in there in those cages with, that was as big as 2 9-passenger vans, I guess. One of them was, and then one next to us. And there was 37 women in one cage and 34 in the other, in that little space. And there was a little 14-year-old girl who was having seizures. She was diabetic and it wouldn't help her. There was a young woman whose back was badly injured because she had been shot off her horse with rubber bullets, and they killed her horse and took her little brothers, they were like 14, 15, away at that time. You know, it was United States of America backing the extractive industry that is bound and determined to kill us all. It was, you know, what that has done, though, is change the trajectory of how people see Indigenous people and people of color when we take the streets. When we take the streets and we express the fullness of the oppression that we have lived under and how that's over, and that a new paradigm is necessary, not just for us, but because we're your neighbor, we are you, that you have to recognize that there is no justice for one until there is justice for all.
It's very powerful. Ashton, for those that don't know, Ashton is my sister. She goes to University of Minnesota and she's studying American history. And I had a talk with her the other day about the same exact thing, about how we could be using our right of free speech and to peacefully assemble. And the United States still has its National Guard come out and terrorize women, children, elders. And she told me in regards to the North Dakota Access Pipeline protest, that boils down to America being a settler colonial state, and that they were founded on needing land and resources to be successful. And when it comes to the voices of Black people and Indigenous people, we're obstacles to the success that they could have. And they're not worried about our lives. You know, they are determined to get money. You know, people come after profit. So it's scary to think about. And when you think about only 40% of white people have shown a concern over climate change in the polls, that's the data that's been collected. And when it comes to people of color, we're more, I think it was 60%, and then with Latinx was like 70% or something like that. I'll have to double check. but it's our voices that need to be included, and it's the voices of Indigenous people that need to be respected. Because like Professor Springer said, and Grandma Casey said, we hold the secrets. We've been on this land for thousands of years. We know how it operates. Our everything from the way that we wake up to everything we do throughout the day as we're going to sleep is all guided towards respecting the land and each other. And that's something that needs to be circulated throughout the American society. And if you guys were listening closely to Grandma Casey's story, that story is no different than what we've been seeing in Minnesota, Portland, and New York. People being stolen, moms being shot at. So if you don't feel it now, there's a calling for everyone to stand up and start fighting for this, because our lives, the lives of our grandchildren, the lives of our great-grandchildren are at risk. And the United States government isn't going to be proactive until we are the ones that demand it from them. Chutes Scott, Grandma Casey, well, I met him last year when I met Grandma Casey. And he's a environmental hip hop artist. If you guys haven't listened to any of his music, you definitely should. But he voiced to me that it's going to take a revolution for us to see a change, because everything in American society is based off of these exploitative practices that put people after profit. And if we want to do anything about that, then we need sovereign communities who are basing their policies off of Indigenous teachings. We need to take our dependence away from the state. In some counties and cities, it's illegal to collect rainwater. How ridiculous is that? That you have to drink bottled water, or you have to drink the tap water that's poisoning us, that they're poisoning us. That the other day, Professor Springer and everyone on the East Coast in my area saw that big hurricane wipe through here, and people were without electric for a week, having no clue really what to do if you didn't have access or money to get a generator. What do? You don't have a garden. You don't have animals out back that you can eat. You're dependent on the supermarkets. You're dependent on that check that's coming in maybe to get the food that you need, the water that you need. And I just want to say it again, if you aren't feeling the pressure, the need to use your voice, then I don't know, but we definitely need to do something about this. And I'm glad that everyone's tuning in. Kabehi, you want to take us into the next question? It would be number 5.
Okay. So the next question that we have for you guys is, what effects of the climate crisis are already being seen and have been irreversible? And why is it important that we act now and how? So does this include initiatives that we can do on our own? Does it include calling upon our state representatives and higher up?
And also voting this fall.
Okay, I'll start it off. So again, like I said before, one of the main reasons what made me start this movement was when I was little, when I see the animals dying, and that a lot of the animals that are dying is because of climate change and temperature rising. Salamanders are dying, frogs are dying, a bunch of things are becoming extinct. Insects, which we need, are becoming extinct. Bees, So with that being said, we need to clean our land. The earth does that itself, but we need to start being more proactive with the kind of things that we're doing, because everything is dying. And then if everything starts dying, what's gonna happen to us? Not only that, but because of temperature rising, we also are seeing a lot more diseases that are coming up. My mom just got Lyme's disease a month ago, and she just got it. She thinks something bit her. That's because there's so many ticks and different insects that are becoming infected with Lyme's, because they're not dying off when they're supposed to, because temperature rising. So it's a big problem, and it's kind of like a domino effect. You know what I mean? When insects are dying off, and the animals are going to start dying off, they're not eating those insects. They do eat those insects, they get infected with something, and it just keeps going until eventually it affects us. And it's already affecting us, and people don't really realize how bad it actually is until they, open their eyes a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, what are we doing? There's so many more mosquitoes now than there was before, and I've noticed that, when I was little, I'm like, I've never been, I'm sitting outside right now, but I'm getting bitten up. And it was never like, I mean, there was always mosquitoes, but the rate is just so much worse now. And that has to do with the temperature rising. I think, also with the vote, I forgot that question, sorry. So we're definitely going to have to go out and vote for sure, this coming fall. And, and I don't know if people are like nervous with the mail-in bailouts and stuff like that, but we need to get something done. We have to vote for the right person, taking those actions to pass the Green New Deal and things that is actually going to be, beneficial for us in the long run and in the climate crisis. So I just hope people, are actually more, educate themselves, don't not just listen to social media and what people are saying, but actually look at the facts and the numbers and actually what's happening. What are they actually going to be preaching and how is that going to be possible? Because sometimes a lot of our candidates say something, but we have other people in the background that stop them. And people don't realize that the people in the background, at the end of the day, it's us. So what are we doing to making sure that the people in office are making sure that we're being taken care of?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and I see you just unmuted at the same time. Slam, you're going to have to say who you want to talk next, because otherwise we're going to have one of those continuing little games. See who unclicks their mic first.
Got you.
Okay, so the things that are going on now that I'm not sure anything's irreversible. I am sure that we are on a trajectory, as you showed on your little map of what's going on. I do know that here in Oklahoma over these past 20 or 30 years, that there's been an incredible change in what's going on with the atmosphere around us, with the climate around us, that we have tornadoes, that they're often category 5 tornadoes. When we do have drought, it's in the extreme. When we do have storms, oftentimes they're ice storms, because the manner in which the storms are created because of the warming, it's an atmospheric reality that we're going to have more of those. They used to be once every 20 years at the closest. Now we can count on several per year. We are seeing, more firestorms that are going on. We do know what's going on with the poles right now. And truthfully, I believe it was at least 20 years ago, a good friend of mine named Faith Gimmel that lives at the Arctic Circle, she's Gwich'in, was telling me that her people were going to be gardening for the very first time ever in their history as a people, because the permafrost was melting. Those are the kind of things that at this time we know that they're going on. We can hope that the signs that COVID-19 showed us when we had a complete shutdown for some weeks of all of the planes and cars, that the carbon dropped 13% in a matter of a few months. So we know that our mother, the earth, and our father sky can heal quickly if human beings, again, get a hold of themselves and start behaving. But COVID-19 is one of the signs, like the ticks that you were talking about, and mosquitoes. When things are encroached on, when the natural laws are broken and the predators are killed and the farms are doing all of these pesticides and it's leaching into the ground and the waters, that things are going to be out of balance. We have had very few generations put us into this position, and it will take very few generations for us to reclaim our spot in the natural cycle as just another animal, another mammal, another portion of nature. One way that we are doing it among the Ponca right now is that we created a statute and it has a model called the Rights of Nature. And it basically is recognizing what we've all been talking about. What is the original instructions? What was the original agreement that happened between all species when the man became, or human became, part of this cycle of life? And it was a certain way that all of us would live in harmony with the natural things around us as a natural being. And it's only man that has wildly strayed from that path. So if man gets back in alignment and understands, instead of fossil fuels, we start using what they call renewable energies and pour all of our thoughts and all of our pressure politically into demanding that happens. You know, I was on a divestment call with Deutsche Bank to ask them to divest from funding Keystone XL, that next thing coming from the tar sands down all the way through and then into Houston and then into the market and then into China, more likely. The last carbon bomb that will really explode and cause us to simply wipe ourselves out. Anyway, we've got to be able to start going to the sources. We have to say, you know, talk to those insurance people who are insuring the pipelines and say, look, that time is up. We're not going to use this bank. We're not going to use this insurance people. We are going to elect these people. We're going to have more young people like yourselves that are going to be put into office to be able to understand that the Green New Deal is really an old deal. You know, this is all we have to do is back up, take a good look at, as the professor was saying, what has worked and put that back in place again in whatever way that we need to do it. I will say this again, it's critical that that time is now. So with every movement we do, with every awareness building that we make, Black Lives Matter, it matters that they have a clean environment just like it does for all of us people of color and all human beings and all the animals. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Our last question was, what is the message you guys want the youth to hear? And I think we covered that pretty thoroughly throughout all of the questions. So Grandma Casey, I do appreciate you taking the time to come out and spread your wisdom. I always love hearing from you. I hope that we can be together soon. Tiara, thank you again. And I'll be linking up with you soon too. Kavehi, do you have any closing thoughts that you want to share?
I think, I don't know, like it's a lot and it's such like a deep rooted issue and topic of conversation. And like when Grandma Casey was talking about when pretty much the dogs came in and took them all out, a lot like that, that also happened in Hawaii on Mauna Kea. I'm not going to dive too much into that because it's going to be a lot, but we'll save that for the next talk. But that's also something that Indigenous people, Native Hawaiians in Hawaii are dealing with, where you have the government pretty much disregarding previous or historical agreements, I guess, or the culture and like the significance of the land, not only of the cultural value, but just like what it brings to the environment. Especially when it has to do with water, like how Grandma Casey was talking about, like water is wealth, essentially. Because in Hawaii, or in Hawaiian, vai is water, vai is wealth, because when you have a lot of water, you have a lot of wealth, because that contributes to being able to grow your crops, being just where you're placed on the land and all of that. But it's just, there's a lot of similarities between indigenous people, like Native Hawaiians and Native Americans, both the good and the bad. And it's just, it's frustrating to see the same story. You just replace the name of the type of people. But again, I know it's tough to hear, but voting right now is super crucial and important in order to make some sort of change, not only like speaking out, education, protesting peacefully, in order to have a, not just a change, just in the present, but for like future generations as well. But I guess for the youth to hear is continue to educate, continue, build your patience, especially for those who don't want to listen, because sometimes those are the people who need to hear it the most. Thank you guys for participating in our talk today. It was definitely enlightening to hear both of you guys speak upon different issues, both similar and different from one another. So thank you guys again for taking time out of your schedule.
The last thing I want to add is that, and I've had a conversation with my neighbors the other day, and they felt as though America shouldn't have to in place environmental regulations if the rest of the world isn't. And her biggest example, like most people, is China. And I'll just say that I don't really care what China is doing. And I feel as though the United States is one of the most powerful countries in the world. It's due time that we start leading by example. It's due time that we start uplifting the voices of the people who have tried to protect the land for generations. And it's time for us to start putting people before profit. If anything has been shown to us in the last months, it's that people of color, natives, and our Black communities, our brown communities are disproportionately affected when it comes to any social problem, and that our destinies are intertwined, and we have to join together if we want to see a change for ourselves and our future generations. And that's all I have. Education, like Kavehi said, and everyone's been saying, is super important to know what is going on in your community, to know how you're being poisoned, and to speak out against it, and to keep pushing that narrative to the youth and allow them, like I do my little sister, to go out into her classrooms and let her peers know, hey, our water is being poisoned, or hey, maybe you shouldn't buy this because that company does that. It's just little stuff like that. And that's how we're going to make the movement strong. And that's how we're going to spark the revolution that's going to change the world. So again, thank you, everyone. And Grandma Casey, again, I cannot wait to see you again. Thank you so much for giving us your time. And Tiara, thank you. Professor Springer's laptop died. So I just want to say shout out to him. He's an awesome professor, and he encourages me to speak up and speak out, and he uplifts the voices of Indigenous people in class. And that's very important. So thank you to him, even though he isn't here to hear that. But thank you, everyone who's tuned in, and I hope we can keep fighting.
Yeah, I do want to say one more thing, though, really quick before we leave. If anybody out there is watching, like the youth, always, like he was saying, always fight for it. Do not stay quiet, because we're going to be really doing a dishonor to our ancestors who, for example, my Taino ancestors, my African ancestors, who fought, and many of them who didn't make it. And if we just stay quiet, it's like a slap in the face to them. If it wasn't for them, we would not be here right now. We would have been gone. Like, so we have to keep talking, we have to vote, we have to keep fighting, we have to stay in the front lines, because without us, like I said, we wouldn't be here right now. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. You have a good one.
Thank you. Tell Auntie Pooh I said hello.
Sure.
And I love you, Sam. Tell the family hi for me.
My mom's sitting here right here. You want to see her real quick? She's been listening to you.
Hi, Grandma Casey. Big hugs.
Hey. Not too long ago,
so beautiful as always.
You were sitting right over there not very long ago. I miss you.
I miss you too. You look beautiful.
Good to see you.
You
Virtual.
too. Love you.
Love you too.
Yeah, love you, Grandma Casey. Thank you so much, guys.
Love you guys.
All right, that's about it.
Very proud of all of you. Thank you for who you are.
Thank you.